Hey, supply chainers, wherever you are in the world, this is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey with you today. Are you ready? Let's talk supply chain.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Thoughts and Coffee. As you can see, I am not Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I am sitting in guest hosting today. My name is Dyci Sfregola. If you don't know me, I am the CEO and founder of Nugent Architects, and I am the host of Action Items, another show on Let's Talk Supply Chain. So as Sarah mentioned on last week's show, I'm going to be joined today by Ashley Yentz. And we are going to be talking about some really fun topics, really interesting supply chain topics. And as always, this show is brought to you by Fastenal. What are your business supply chain challenges? Too much inventory on hand, too many disruptions and stockouts? Are there too many steps and touch points involved? I bet there are. Fastenal can tailor a solution from automated bins that monitor your inventory 24/7 to vending devices that help you track and control the products that keep your business running. So go to fastenal.com/LTSC, that's Let's Talk Supply Chain, the initials, to see how. Fastenal, where industry meets innovation. So what do we have coming up in the world of Let's Talk Supply Chain? We have episode 325 of Let's Talk Supply Chain that was released yesterday on the 27th. And it is an episode with Invase Technologies, which is a game-changing TMS provider. They are on a mission to guide the freight industry into a more sustainable and profitable future. And I know Ashley, our guest, that is her thing, sustainability. So we'll be talking more about that later today. Go ahead and check out the latest episode wherever you listen to Let's Talk Supply Chain, wherever you listen to your podcast. We also have coming up this week, the Let's Talk Supply Chain team is at TPM 23, and that is hosted by JOC.com from February 26th. So starting on Sunday until March 1st. So be sure to look out for Sarah Barnes-Humphrey and other members of the Let's Talk Supply Chain team if you are at TPM this week. And on Friday, we have on Let's Talk Supply Chain LogTech Live, and that is with Eric Johnson. I am sure he'll be talking a little bit about TPM since he is there right now. And the title of that show is Let's Get Real, What Freight Forwarders Need from Tech. And if you know me, you know I love supply chain tech. So definitely check it out. I'm sure it will be very, very interesting. Tons of fun. Eric always provides really great insights on the industry. So without further ado, let's bring up our guest for today to join me, Ashley. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
I am great. I am excited to kind of be taking over here.
Yeah, we're gonna learn this together. We're gonna get through it. It'll be great.
Yes, absolutely. Good morning, Jose Luis. Good morning, David, Saham, everyone that's joining and commenting. Thank you for joining us. So Ashley, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Give us a little introduction of what you do, what your supply chain passions are, what really gets you up out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, great. My name's Ashley Yentz, and I work for a company called Sleep Number. My average sleep IQ score is 75, which is just okay. Before this call, DC and I were talking about our young children, so she probably understands a little bit about that. I run our supply chain strategy and material flow, and what that means is I'm really in charge of movement of material in and out throughout our supply chain as we make our smart beds and deliver them to our customer. As far as what I'm passionate about, I'm really passionate about process and systems thinking, and thinking about how we're leveraging our insights in supply chain to really influence the organization and organizational change. And in one space that we can be, very valuable influencers is in this space of sustainability. We see how these products move, how they are reused and how they're not reused, what gets thrown away. And these things can help inform a business strategy and influence product design and other spaces. So I think of people that work in supply chain as kind of the owners of a lot of information that can spark a lot of change within our supply chain.
That's a lot of data that you're
Yes.
looking at in order to be able to get those insights and just to be able to say, where do I look for the raw data that is going to need to be calculated, and what goes with what to figure out what are these insights that I need.
That's right. And I think we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the technology, AI, and some other technologies that are being introduced. And I think that's going to allow a lot of time and space for supply chainers to be thinkers instead of just doers, right? So this last year, we've been trying to clean up large messes, get ships out of port, do a lot of this block and tackle. And I think coming out of it, we can be more strategic and be thinking about how we solve real problems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So before we get into those conversations, though, our weekly poll, the Let's Talk Supply Chain weekly poll, was, what is your favorite Let's Talk Supply Chain show? Did you vote for this, Ashley?
I did. I think I did women in supply chain.
I did too. Yeah. I mean, maybe is it obvious?
It might be. But I think, what was our favorite here? I think
Let's Talk Supply Chain ended up being the favorite, but like by far, not even close.
Come on.
I think it was like 90% of people voted for Let's Talk Supply Chain. Women in Supply Chain was second, not nearly a close second. It's one of those things to where like the leader was greater than everyone else combined.
Yeah. And let's just say like the banner, Let's Talk Supply Chain, was the banner that posted the poll.
Yes. So talk about bias,
Exactly.
And it's actually interesting. So I started my career in sales and marketing because my first degree was in Spanish linguistics and literature. And I was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but I speak Spanish. So I had done some like sales and marketing work throughout college. And I was like, well, I'm just going to keep doing that. Social media at the time was just becoming this thing that companies didn't really know if like we want to leverage it versus this is kind of silly. So it was just at that point where I was working with, a small business in Atlanta to figure out how to leverage this new thing called social media. And when I made my career transition to supply chain, or I was thinking about it, it was the Women in Supply Chain podcast that really gave me the courage to say, yes, this is what I want to do, because, as cliche as it sounds, like representation matters. Yes. And I was looking in the industry and I was like, there's no way I'm going to, as a woman of color and coming from a different background, be able to do anything in this industry. And the Women in Supply Chain series, there are a lot of women who like didn't study engineering or they didn't study supply chain.
That's right.
They found their way to be these very successful VPs, SVPs, managing manufacturing globally and things like that. So it was Women in Supply Chain, that series, that really said, yes, Dyci, go into supply chain. You can do it.
Amazing.
So I just can't believe it got so few votes.
I know. And it changed your life. Look at that.
Yes, I can honestly say that I am here right now today hosting this show with you because I watched Women in Supply Chain. Like I binge listened for a couple of weeks to get the courage.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're with us.
I am too. All righty. So let's get into the first article. This is actually on the New Gen Architects page. And we are talking about in this article, kind of what you already touched on a little bit, 3 ways that modular manufacturing companies can use software and AI to improve operational efficiency and productivity. But it is Of course, not only focused or limited to modular manufacturing. I mean, automating the procurement process, smart scheduling for workstations, overall visibility into the manufacturing process, the shipping and logistics, the transportation. Right now in modular, like the transportation and shipping and logistics is a huge challenge. Because of course you may or may not know, the housing shortage and a lot of affordable housing. There are, local government, city government, state governments, et cetera, who are looking to modular as a solution. And the promise of modular is that you're not having these stick built, traditional construction of people going to the site, getting your inventory, your raw materials, but then it rains, but then it snows, but then you can't do it. In a factory, all of that is controlled. And then you can also, we know manufacturing, just repeat the process. And it's a lot easier to program the machine to cut, as opposed to having a person on site. And it's a lot less error prone. And the promise is that it's going to be faster, so you can build houses faster, you can build buildings faster.
Interesting.
But the big challenge right now is it's still a fairly, relatively speaking to other industries, it's a very new and immature industry. So when it comes to, okay, cool, I built this house in Texas, but I need to get it across 4 state lines. Then it becomes, I need a flatbed truck, and I need a truck I need a driver that can do this, and I need this and this. And then that cost of affordable housing just balloons and balloons and balloons and balloons.
Interesting.
Especially, in the last couple of years with all of the freight and the transportation cost increasing.
Yes.
So there's been a lot of talk about smart logistics and automation and the planning of this horizontal, very, very much horizontal supply chain. You have your contractors, you have your HVAC, you have the walls, the panels, the electricity, the on-site assembly, like everything. It's plan. It's not cut, it's not measure twice. It's like measure 5 times.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Right.
And there just aren't a lot of technologies that companies like Sleep Number, I'm sure, have been using for decades. And it's a really big challenge to figure out what is I hate to say wild, wild west, but because other industry leaders that I've talked to call it the wild, wild west, developers, other manufacturers, that's kind of where the industry is right now. And just needing to adopt some of this technology that other companies within their supply chain, again, have been doing for decades.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So what this article is really talking about is the coordination of what would typically happen on a job site, but now it's happening in the manufacturing space, right?
Exactly.
So what I loved, what this article spoke to is like making consumption visible. So understanding what's being consumed when, and that being able to generate an inventory strategy and have signals to how we're sourcing that product, how we're moving that product, and doing that in kind of this synchronized way, which is, I think, a problem any manufacturer can kind of resonate with, right? We have to send signals and sourcing signals to suppliers well in advance of a new product rollout. And what we're talking about is leveraging technology to kind of help with that coordination,
right?
Which is fantastic.
Yes, and one of the big things, and of course, I might be biased because this is on the NGA website. But one of the big things that I think is really important to note is that whenever you talk about automation, whenever you talk about AI software, there's always sometimes this underlying fear of I'm going to lose my job. The robots are going to take over, and I think that it's really important to understand that it only provides a different way of working. So you talked about the blocking and tackling. You're not blocking and tackling anymore. People are going to have time for strategic thinking. And it's not that, like, I think that something something that people who don't really understand how the technology work, sometimes they will have this thought that, oh, well, now the technology is just going to do it. And that's also not how it works. Someone has to maintain it. So you're actually creating more jobs. You're just creating different types of jobs. So
Yes.
whereas you had someone doing like this very tactical manual, process, they're now going to be doing something more strategic where AI and software automation can help them, but they still have to like do the work. They still have to do the
Right.
job. Mm.
Right, I agree. And as complexity builds, right, like as your SKUs proliferate, AI and that sort of technology should allow us not to also overextend our labor, right? So often in supply chain, you see our labor go up with SKU complexity and or volume, right?
Mhm.
And what I'm hoping with AI and some other technologies is that allows us to kind of keep pressure on our labor force and not have to go through peaks and valleys as often as maybe we would when we're just having to touch everything
Right.
through the system. Yeah.
Just it always brings back home and drives back home. And I feel like we can't say it enough. The digital aspect of supply chain manufacturing, whatever it is, it's always back to people.
Yeah.
The technology is never just going to solve everything. And it's very interesting in this modular construction phase and manufacturing, because so many companies that are, coming up in this space and who are successful in this space, were construction companies. And now you kind of have to be a manufacturing company, which is a completely different hiring, profile.
Yes.
You have people have different skill sets within a manufacturing plant than you do on a construction site. A lot of things still translate, safety, compliance, things
Right.
like that. But so much else of it will change from the people aspect. So, the software is not a silver bullet. You have to also consider the people.
Yeah, right
So
on.
our next article, I've only used big systems, so I'm learning about the other ways. I couldn't imagine manufacturing ops not having ERP with other functions like MRP, WMS, et cetera, for single source at all levels. Very interesting comment, because when I started in GA, I actually wanted to focus on small and medium businesses because
Interesting.
I too started my career in working with the big guys, and they had these advanced planning systems and an ERP that was integrated with the TMS, and they had all of these different systems.
Yeah.
And then when you get into that small medium space, it's like they might have an ERP, but
Yeah.
also not strange if they don't. Not strange if they have an ERP literally from 1995.
Right. That's not supported
Not
anymore.
strange if it's on premise and they haven't gone into the cloud.
Yeah.
So we actually, it's funny because there are times where I've met someone who we worked with a wine distributor, importer distributor up in New York, and their
Nice.
new director of supply chain, I want to say, came from like Procter and Gamble or like Kimberly Clark, like some big brand that everyone knows.
Yeah.
And he was like, "What is this? Like, what is the system that we have? It doesn't do anything."
It's what we have. I know.
So one of the things that we try to do is help companies understand, like, in the world of supply chain tech, there are options if you're not a billion-dollar publicly traded company. And even on a small scale, if you can save, especially you talked about labor productivity, if you can save on labor productivity, just from that aspect, it's a great solution to be looking at automation software.
Yes.
Thanks for your comment. Next, what is our next article? We have
Laura.
I really wanted to talk to you about this one, Ashley, the talk the supply chain leader needs to have with their CFO.
Yeah.
And I've been seeing a lot of posts just this year. It's still very early in the year. I think we're March next tomorrow. We're in March tomorrow. So we're still only 2 months in, but I've been seeing a lot of people posting on LinkedIn about supply chain in the boardroom and how, the last couple of years has thrust supply chain leaders into having these very high level strategic conversations. And one thing that I liked about this article that Laura talked about was the balanced scorecard. And how, we can't just only be talking about dollars and dollars and dollars and the lowest cost and the lowest cost, which, as Laura also says in the article, this is something, it's not new. None of these points are new, but especially now as sustainability and circularity are becoming even more important, and we're looking at that kind of data. What types of conversations is your team having, and the type of data and kind of the story that you guys are preparing for the CFO and the boardroom?
Yeah. So as you can imagine, right, we went through a turmoil over a couple of years, and we were surviving. We had disruption after disruption, which was impacting revenue and all these other things. And one of the indices that Laura points out in her article is called the Supply Chain Pressure Index. This is a relatively new indice out of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And what it tells us right now when we think about what's happening in the supply chain is we are going back. Supply chain, I'll just say, isn't totally out of whack anymore. If you look at where the pressure index goes through COVID, it was spiking at close to 4 or 5 standard deviation from normal. What we're doing is we're headed back towards normal. We're hovering a little bit over a standard deviation away from what this indice would consider normal. And this indice looks at a lot of things. It looks at commodity costs, customer on-time delivery across a lot of different countries and different businesses. So we look at that, and what we're articulating to our board and to our leadership right now is things are getting better. We're seeing some easing. We're seeing some easing in commodity prices, some material costs, as well as freight costs, right? Things aren't stuck at ports. We have relatively open ports at the moment. However, and we'll get to this even in our the next article that we listened to, I should say, also talks about kind of this onshoring movement that's happening to de-risk. So what Laura talks about is things are getting a little bit better, but we still need to consider gross margin. So where our conversations are going is how do we impact gross margin for the long term, but also take advantage of some lightening of some of these markets. So when I say lightening, right, we get some commodity goodness from a materials perspective and some freight goodness, but we don't want to over-index on that freight goodness because we still want to have asset-based carriers and ships that will stay with us through any other disruption that may occur at any time. So we need to be cautiously optimistic. And then where this conversation is really going is how do we leverage our current assets, some of the easing in commodities, to really think about how our gross margin improvement gets better when we think about how we flow material out and back. So in my business, like many mattress businesses, you can sleep on a bed for 100 days and it can come back. It's a comfort guarantee. We always will have returns in our business. So we have to be thinking about how to drive waste out from a total circular perspective. And we're starting to tell that story more and start to plan with our infrastructure how we can be nimble in those decisions. And that's kind of the story we're telling. And that story includes our partners in product, includes our partners in service. If you think about it, right, I think Laura talks about reducing complexity in our marketing. When we're designing a product, we should be thinking about how those parts relate to our install. We call it an install base. We service our beds for more than 10 years. And we have to be thinking about when we implement new SKUs, how that's going to impact the margin of the next SKU. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to minimize complexity, leverage the assets that we have, take advantage of the easing commodity and freight pressures that we have today, and just be smarter with how we move things out. We have this slogan that's like, move it once, right? We want it to get to the customer, stay at the customer forever and ever. Right? Yeah. And we also don't really want to service that. We want it to be a really nice product that holds through its warranty. So we're talking about all sectors of the business, trying to influence that so that we're moving things once. And that's going to drive out waste in our gross margin. And what's interesting about talking to your CFO is we've had to maneuver how we're looking at our P&L to see some of that goodness from a returns perspective that we're impacting by just thinking about how we move it once. So we're having gross margin, and I think this is probably for a lot of businesses out there, that's really our focus now. It's not so much about the disruption. It's about how do we leverage what we have and really drive out the waste.
Right. And one thing that I like that Laura also said is that spreadsheets don't yield the best decisions.
No.
And of course, as a techie geek, I'm always like, yes, yay, we mentioned it.
Yes.
So do you see that, the people who need to understand that at the C-suite, at the board level, understand like we have to invest in this technology. We can't be in spreadsheets anymore.
Yes. Well, what's great about the company I work for is we are an innovation company and we are a smart bed. So we actually do a lot of investment in digital already. So I don't have that battle as much as other people do, but I will say that we are behind in some of the ways that our systems connect. Because we've been going through this network transformation that now we're trying to overhaul our digital strategy that allows us to see and react better and faster.
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. On to the last article, and we've got just enough time, I think, to get through it. So why made in China is becoming made in Mexico. And when I was choosing this article, there was actually another article that was the opposite, that said made in China is not becoming made in everywhere else as much as people are thinking. And I went for this one just because it really talked about how the movement into Mexico, because we hear a lot about India, I think, as an alternative to China, Indonesia, and Mexico for, companies that are conscious about having a shorter supply chain, that are conscious about the carbon footprint for transportation and things like that. A lot of them are opting for Mexico. And you mentioned the port easing, and this article / podcast says essentially that the ports are easing a little bit because things are coming over land from Mexico, and with the free trade zone with all of North America, with Canada and the US, for North America, having things made in Mexico also contributes to job development within the region here.
Yes, I love that point. So this and the podcast really emphasizes this isn't the end of globalization. China is one of our largest economies. They will always be producing goods for their economy, which means they will always be producing things. Not to mention there's just certain components, certain materials that we can only get in certain regions. So this isn't saying it's the end of globalization, but it is the continued movement. It kind of, out of our 2018 tariff war, you started to see supply and supply chains move a little bit. China and Mexico have always been at the top, but you can see Vietnam kind of start to move up the list. People are trying to find different places to kind of avoid the trade war. And what the pandemic did was with the disruption and these long freaking lead times to get our materials, people started to really emphasize this onshoring movement. And they talk about Manhwa, which is so funny. I did a lot of business with Manhwa. My background's furniture and retail. And I've always been pro bringing things closer because of the reliability and the flexibility it gives you. If you have a disruption out of Mexico, it's way easier to potentially recover that over land than it would be overseas. So a lot of companies are kind of bombarding Mexico right now. But what I love, the viewpoint that I appreciated in this podcast was when you bring things close to the United States, to North America, that I think it said like 40% of it comes.
The value of that is created within the States versus 4% from China.
Yeah, from China, we almost, and they have actually like a goal to make that 0%. And so when we nearshore, it helps our economy, it helps our jobs, because I can use an example. I used to work with Polaris. Polaris would source, wire harnesses in North America, but then they go produce something in Mexico and then bring it back over the border to go to the dealership. So all these, so they're using the supply chain that's closer by, and when it all rolls into Mexico. So it's been this movement has been going on for a long time, from 2018, and I think it will continue. And what's positive from a North American perspective is some of the infrastructure that's going to be invested in from a supply chain perspective. Ports are getting more investment. I think it talked a lot about Laredo and those border crossing areas in Mexico getting way more infrastructure and investment. I think it says there's some way to go on infrastructure as far as the roads in Mexico, but I think those are going to get way better. So it's all going to bring investment closer to home, which I think will be beneficial longer term.
Right. And we are 40 seconds over. Just a heads up, we're at 30 minutes. Yes. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for sticking around for an extra minute to chat supply chain with us. Next week, Sarah is still out. Audrey will be taking over thoughts and comments.
Nice.
And we'll see you next time. Have a good one.
Thank you so much.